was the summer of 2019, and I had just moved to Spokane, Washington for a new job. I didn't know anyone there yet, so I often went on evening walks to clear my head after work. There was a public park about a 10-minute drive from my apartment. It wasn't anything fancy, just a few ball fields, a small pond, and some winding walking trails that disappeared into the trees. The city website described it as peaceful and lightly trafficked. That lightly trafficked part would come back to haunt me. One Thursday evening, I got home from work around 7 p.m. It was one of those perfect summer evenings, warm air, fading sunlight, and the smell of pine in the breeze. I decided to head to the park with my earbuds in and a podcast queued up. When I pulled into the lot, I noticed only 2 other cars. The place felt almost deserted. That was normal for a weekday evening, so I didn't think much of it. I started my usual loop around the pond before taking the longer trail that cut into the woods. The trail was paved at first, but about half a mile in, the pavement turned to packed dirt. The deeper I went, the quieter it got. Just the crunch of gravel under my shoes and the occasional chirp of crickets. About 15 minutes in, I saw something odd. Up ahead, on the side of the trail, there was a worn-out picnic shelter. It wasn't anything special, just a wooden roof on old beams, with 2 splintered tables underneath. But I could tell it hadn't been used in a while. The paint was peeling, weeds were growing through the floor, and there was a single plastic water bottle sitting in the middle of one table. At first, I thought nothing of it. People leave trash all the time. But as I walked past, I realized the water bottle was nearly full, and next to it was something stranger, an old flip phone, face down. I kept moving, telling myself, maybe someone left it there and went to the bathroom or something. But then, I noticed movement in my peripheral vision. Someone was in the trees, maybe 30 feet off the trail. They weren't walking. They were standing perfectly still, angled toward me. The only reason I spotted them was because of the fading sunlight hitting their outline. My first thought was maybe it was a park ranger or someone just resting. But they didn't wave, speak, or even shift their stance. I couldn't make out details, just a dark figure. Trying to act casual, I kept walking, but my pace picked up. I didn't want to look behind me right away, but after another 30 seconds, I glanced back. The figure was gone. I don't know why, but that somehow made me more uneasy. I took out my phone and pretended to check messages, just in case anyone nearby could see I wasn't totally distracted. A few minutes later, I heard the faintest crunch of leaves behind me. I turned my head just enough to catch movement again. Someone stepping out onto the trail, maybe 50 feet back. This time, I could see a little more. A man, tall, wearing a dirty gray hoodie with the hood up. He was walking slowly, his arms swinging just slightly, his eyes locked on me. My stomach tightened. I turned forward and kept walking, but inside, I was already running through my options. I was still at least 10 minutes from the parking lot. That's when I saw another trail branch off to the left. I'd never taken it before, but I knew it curved toward the ball fields. Without hesitating, I veered onto it, hoping to lose him. The path was narrower here, overgrown with tall grass on either side. My heart was pounding in my ears. After maybe 100 yards, I risked another look back. He was still there, only now he was jogging. That was it. I broke into a full sprint. The branches scraped my arms as I tore through the trail, my breath coming in short bursts. The path eventually opened into a clearing where I could see the baseball field lights in the distance. I ran straight across the grass, not stopping until I hit the gravel lot. There were still only 2 other cars there. One of them, an older red sedan, had its headlights on now, pointed toward the exit. I jumped into my own car, locked the doors, and looked in the rearview mirror. The man had just stepped out of the trail entrance, stopping at the edge of the trees. Even from a distance, I could see his hood still up, his head tilted slightly, watching me. I floored it out of there and didn't stop until I was halfway home. When I told a coworker about it the next day, she gave me a look I'll never forget. She said that a few years back, a man had been arrested for attacking joggers on that very trail. Supposedly, he'd been released recently. I've never gone back to that park, and even now, every time I see a red sedan, I can't help but feel that same cold, crawling fear from that night in 2019. This happened back when I was 27 years old. I was living in a medium-sized town in northern Colorado, not a bustling city, but not exactly some isolated mountain hollow either. Around 80,000 people lived here, thanks mostly to the university that kept the place lively. And like most towns, we had our share of public parks. The newest one at the time was Hollow Creek Park, on the edge of town near the foothills. It had the works: a dog park, a playground for kids, open fields, and a network of walking trails, some of which snaked deep into wooded areas. On warm evenings, you could always spot a few people out there with their dogs or jogging, even after the sun dipped behind the mountains. To give you a clear picture, the park had two main parking areas. The big lot was at the east entrance, right by the playground, dog park, and restrooms. It was long, stretching parallel to the sidewalk that ran alongside the children's play area. Then, about a mile of trail away, over a couple of hills and through the woods, there was a smaller lot near a little pond. This back lot had a gate, but in front of it was a short pull-off area where people sometimes parked at night when the gate was locked. Back then, I had a friend named Lena. She was 29, small in frame, and fearless in a way that made me nervous. She loved walking at night. She claimed it was calming and gave her the solitude she needed after long work days. Her apartment was out near the edge of town, just a short drive from Hollow Creek Park, so she'd often head there for her evening walks, even after dark. I'd sometimes tell her, it's not always the safest thing to do, but she'd just roll her eyes and remind me that being a woman didn't mean she needed to live in fear. Still, I worried. Call it old-fashioned or overprotective. I'd grown up in a family where we looked out for each other. Eventually, I started meeting her at the park a couple nights a week. I figured a 6'2" guy walking alongside her might keep away anyone with bad intentions. One particular night sticks with me like a shadow. It was late October, and the air had that crisp, earthy smell of fallen leaves. The sun had set an hour earlier, so it was already dark, but not so late that we expected the park to be empty. Maybe 8:15 or so. I had a rental car that week because my own was in the shop, and I'd parked it in that little area by the back gate near the pond. We'd walked the trails for about 40 minutes and were coming back toward the big lot by the playground. The trail curved over a hill, giving a partial view of the parking area below. That's when I noticed it. A van. It had just turned in through the east entrance. The gate was still open. The city parks department was notorious for not locking up exactly at dusk. Now, a van in itself isn't weird, but this one, it was the kind of van you'd expect in the opening scene of a crime documentary. Old Chevy, no side windows, a faded and rust-speckled paint job, and front windows tinted almost black. At first, I brushed it off. This is Colorado. You see your share of beat-up old vehicles. But the way it moved, slowly, deliberately, it put me on edge. As Lena and I followed the sidewalk along the lot, the van pulled past the playground and then turned toward us. It rolled by on our left side, slowing down so much that I could feel the driver watching us. Then it looped around the far end of the lot, coming back in our direction. This time, the driver's window was down. The man inside looked like he had stepped out of every bad gut feeling I'd ever had. He was huge, even bigger than me, wearing a dark trucker hat pulled low, aviator-style glasses that reflected the lot's dim lights, and a thick black mustache. His coat looked heavy, military style. He didn't smile, didn't nod, didn't speak, just stared. And I don't mean the kind of glance you give someone when you're curious. I mean the kind of look that strips away every illusion of safety you've ever had. Something in his eyes was cold, empty, and fixed, like a predator watching something it already considers caught. I felt it in my chest, deep and ancient, that primal alarm bell that rings when your body decides, this person will harm you if you let them. I grabbed Lena's arm and muttered, "Let's go." We stepped off the sidewalk and cut across the open field toward the trees, putting as much ground as we could between us and him without breaking into a run. When I glanced back, the van had pulled out of the lot. For a second, relief flickered. Then we reached the first rise in the trail, and I froze. The van was back. It was parked directly behind my rental car, headlights blazing up the hill toward us. We ducked behind some brush and watched as the driver flicked his brights on and off, almost like he was signaling. Then he eased back, shining the beams higher up the slope, sweeping them across the trees. We hadn't brought our phones. They were locked in the car. Stupid. Lena whispered, "What do we do?" I didn't have an answer. My heart was pounding so hard I could feel it in my teeth. After about a minute, he suddenly peeled out of the lot, tires crunching on the gravel. We bolted down the hill toward the car. We were maybe 50 yards away when the van came roaring back into the lot. We dove behind the nearest tree. The headlights swept the slope again, this time stopping right where we were hidden. The beams stayed locked there for what felt like forever. My hands were balled into fists. I was seconds from charging at him just to give Lena a chance to run. Then, as suddenly as he'd come, he tore out of the lot again, speeding off toward the 2-lane road beyond the park. We didn't waste another second. We sprinted to the car, jumped in, and I floored it, hitting 65 before we even reached the first neighborhood. We never saw him again on the road. It was like he'd vanished into the dark. When we got to Lena's place, she didn't even argue when I handed her the small canister of pepper spray I kept in my glove box. She took it with a shaky laugh and said, "Guess I'll keep this on me from now on." We sat for an hour, replaying every detail, trying to make sense of it. The next morning, I went to the police station and gave a statement. The officer listened, took notes, and told me they'd keep an eye out for the van. I never heard back. I don't know if he was just trying to scare us, or if we interrupted something much worse. All I know is that the look in his eyes wasn't casual curiosity, it was intent, and I never want to see it again. It was late October of 2018, and I was a quiet, 15-year-old high school sophomore living in a small town in Oregon. I wasn't the kind of person who went to parties or hung out in big groups. My comfort zone was staying home, reading, or walking my dog in the evenings when the streets were empty. But that Friday night, my friends had other plans. They invited me to meet them at Ridgewood Park, a wide-open recreational field with a small playground, basketball court, and a paved trail that wound into the woods on the north side. Normally, my parents wouldn't let me be out after dark, but they were away for the weekend, visiting my grandparents, and my older sister was working late. I figured it was my one chance to say yes to something social. By 8:30 p.m., I grabbed my hoodie, locked the door behind me, because that was the one rule my parents drilled into me, and started the 15-minute walk to the park. When I got there, the air was crisp, the field lights casting a pale glow over the empty playground. My friends were clustered near the basketball court, laughing about something, so I went to join them. We stayed there for a while, talking, tossing a ball around, and joking about the strange noises coming from the woods. But about half an hour in, I noticed something that stopped me mid-laugh. At the far edge of the park, Where the pavement from the trail disappeared into the tree line, a man was standing completely still. He was maybe in his late 30s, dressed in a dark jacket and baseball cap, just watching. The distance between us was too far to see his face clearly, but there was something about his posture, shoulders slightly hunched, head tilted, that made me uneasy. I didn't mention it. I didn't want to be the paranoid one who ruined the night. Over the next hour, people slowly began to head home. Parents arrived in cars to pick up their kids, and the group thinned until only 3 of us remained. The park grew quieter, the lights buzzing faintly overhead. A light breeze moved through the trees, carrying the smell of damp leaves. And then I saw him again. He hadn't moved far, just enough to be half hidden by the tree line. When the others weren't looking, I caught him step slightly forward, almost like he was closing the distance, before pausing again. By 10 p.m., the last of my friends was climbing into a car, leaving me alone to walk home. My route took me along the paved path on the right side of the park, which eventually opened onto a quiet residential street. Unfortunately, that was the exact direction in which the man was. I told myself it was fine. It was probably just someone walking their dog or waiting for someone. Still, my heart was pounding as I started toward the exit. My sneakers crunched softly on the gravel as I crossed the empty field, eyes locked on the opening between the trees. When I got within about 20 feet of it, the man turned fully toward me. No phone in his hand, no dog leash, nothing to suggest he had a reason to be there. I sped up. So did he. The second I passed the entrance to the trail, I broke into a run. A couple of weak overhead lamps dimly lit the path, but most of it was swallowed in darkness. I could hear my breath, loud and uneven. And then, behind me, another set of footsteps, heavy, measured, getting closer. I didn't dare look back. I just kept running, my bag bouncing against my side, my shoes hitting the pavement faster than I thought possible. I knew the trail would eventually open onto my neighborhood, and once I hit familiar ground, I could cut through backyards to lose him. But when I reached the halfway point, I heard something that froze my blood. The footsteps weren't just behind me anymore. They were closer, and paired with the faint sound of breathing, slow, deliberate inhales. The trail opened into a clearing, and I took the sharp turn toward my street, veering off onto the grass to cut through the back of a church property. I could hear him behind me now, running, the rhythm of his steps quickening. In that moment, instinct took over. I zigzagged through the parking lot, dodged between 2 cars, and bolted toward the alley behind my house. I didn't dare check to see how close he was. I could feel it. When I reached my front porch, my hands fumbled with the keys. The sound of footsteps on the concrete steps behind me made my chest tighten. I shoved the door open, slammed it shut, and twisted the lock just as someone, hit the door hard from the other side. The impact rattled through the frame. I backed away, shaking, every nerve in my body screaming. I turned off all the lights, locked the windows, and grabbed the closest thing I could find for protection, a heavy flashlight. Then I crouched in my bedroom, barely breathing, listening for any sign he was still there. But after a few minutes, silence. I didn't call the police. I was terrified of explaining why I was out that late without my parents knowing. Months passed. I didn't go out after dark anymore, and I never walked that trail again. By February, I'd pushed the memory far enough away that it felt almost like a bad dream, until something happened at school. A girl from my math class was telling a friend about being followed home from the bus stop. She described the man as wearing a dark jacket, baseball cap, average height, late 30s or 40s. My stomach dropped. Another student overheard and said he'd seen someone just like that, hanging around the park at night. None of us had called the police. None of us had connected the dots. Then, in May, My older sister woke me up one morning with her phone in hand. She showed me a local news alert, a mugshot of a man who had been arrested for breaking into a woman's house 2 towns over. It was him, the same dark jacket, the same narrow eyes under the brim of a cap. The article said he'd been spotted loitering near parks and trails for months before the arrest. I still walk past Ridgewood Park sometimes on my way home from school, but I never take the trail. I don't linger near the woods, and if I see someone standing still in the distance, even for a second, I turn around and take the long way, because I learned that night that silence, stillness, and shadows can be more dangerous than noise.